I went to a screening at the GGA of the first film that Bryan and Christopher McQuarrie made together, Public Access. And it was just a screening. And I went because a number of people I knew had either seen it or had heard about it. And so they encouraged me to go see this new sort of filmmaking team. And so I went, and I thought it was just an incredibly unusual film and very strong movie. And its narrative was incredibly strong. And it was quirky and amusing and kind of daring.
And I was introduced to him by a mutual friend, Gregory Cook. And Kevin said, I really love this movie. If there's anything that you think I might be right for that you're doing in the future, please give me a call.
And Chris said, well, that's funny because we're actually working on something that we're actually thinking of you for.
And Chris, who I'd grown up with, went to high school with, had an idea of, it was called The Usual Suspects, and the idea was 5 felons would meet in a lineup and go off on an odyssey of crime. And the poster would be 5 felons standing in a lineup, and the tagline of the movie would be, all of you can go to hell.
So they sent it, and I had no idea of the role. So I read the script really just looking at it as a story rather than trying to figure out whether I was right for a specific part. And I got to the end of it, and I was deeply confused. So I had to read it again.
I always equated the movie with The Wizard of Oz. New York was Kansas. Los Angeles was Oz, with a whole cast of strange characters that they would encounter. You know, Redfoot by the Korean friendship bell, and this strange pool hall where they meet Kobayashi. Is he the man, or is he the man behind the curtain? You know, you don't know. And so I always drew parallels, and I think that's where a lot of that design and perhaps some of the color and vibrance came from.
So I called Bryan and I said, you know, the role of there were a couple of roles that I liked. I mean, there were Chazz's part and Gabriel's part I thought were very interesting roles, but I said there's this other part, this character of Verbal, and what I didn't know was on the other end of the phone they were going because that was in fact the part that they wrote with me in mind.
After our first encounter at the public access screening, we actually became friends. So you know, it was a pleasure to be able to have a friend that you were excited about as an actor in this pivotal role. What made it difficult was casting supporting roles with actors, because he was not so well known that other bigger actors who meant more to the money people wouldn't play in a supporting role, or wouldn't play in a smaller role. And I had some, it was tough, but worthwhile.
Once I committed to the film, which was easy to do, we then began the process of casting the other roles. I buttonholed Gabriel at a party.
I have to admit that I really didn't want to do the picture. I didn't think on the reading of the script that it was going to work, and I, for personal reasons, didn't want to work at that time.
It was somebody we always talked about. He wasn't the first person we went to, but because the financiers were like, oh, you got to get a bigger name or something, but in the end it was the guy we secretly always wanted.
With a certain amount of skepticism, I met Bryan Singer and Chris McQuarrie here in this hotel on the Sunset Marquee. And there's something about talking to a director who has a passion for the project that he's involved in. And not just a passion, but a vision of how he's going to execute it. And there was a tremendous clarity about Bryan Singer's images and the way he wanted to tell the story.
Always wanted Chazz Palminteri. He was never available. Met with other people, talked to other people. Al Pacino even read it, but at the time he was playing a cop in another movie, and wasn't interested for that reason, I believe. And then all of a sudden Chazz was available, but only for a little over a week.
You really had this view of what the film should be that I said, well, you know what? Let's take a shot. Let's go with it. And you start out with a great script, and I thought it was a great script, and good actors and a great director, and you say, well, something could happen.
That also is what helped get the film made, because he had this brief window of availability. He was just coming off Bronx Tale and the role in the Woody Allen film, so he was very, very, it was a good time for all of us. And that kind of pushed the financiers, ultimately.
I remember Bryan saying to me that this guy was tough, he was smart, and he was trying to get ahead of he was really trying to get ahead of everyone. He was trying to get to the bottom of it. I just didn't want him to be tough and smart. I wanted him to be also compassionate, that he understood verbal, that there were moments in my performance that he felt for him, and he liked him, and he just felt that he got duped. So the more colors that I can give to a character that I play, I just think the fuller it is and the more interesting it is.
I think that the thing I wanted Bryan Singer to think first about me was that at any moment I might start choking him, just to see how he'd react. And he was fascinating. He was calm, and he was focused, and he was tough. He was tough. And I went into a 15-minute monologue about, what it's like to work with me, and you better know what you're getting yourself into, and I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do that, and if I can't do it my way, then f*** you. And after 15 minutes, Bryan was great. He just sat and listened, and he was calm, and he said, are you finished? And I said, yeah, and he said, okay. Here's how it works. You're going to do what I say, when I say it, the way I say it, or you won't be in this movie. And for me, it was exactly what I had hoped for, but the process I had to go through to get to that moment was one that was very combative, because I was so used to guys making promises to me in the independent film world that they couldn't keep.
Many actors who take their work seriously challenge you because they really ultimately want to be taken care of, and they challenge you to make sure that you're going to have the strength and the tenacity to take care of them so that they can just micromanage their character and not worry about the movie.
I hadn't auditioned for a movie between A Few Good Men and Usual Suspects, and certainly that wasn't part of the situation as far as my involvement. Bryan just wanted to meet with me and talk with me and tell me he was a big fan and would love for me to be in his movie. And then I left the meeting and, talked to my agent, who had talked to Bryan, and my agent said, hey, it went great, and he's crazy about the possibility of you being in his movie. He does have to see these other two actors that he'd already agreed to see that are coming into audition. And I found myself saying this almost involuntarily, fuck that. Tell Bryan I'll come back tomorrow and audition. I'm not going to take the chance that these two actors, one of them is going to come in and blow him away.
I began seeing it clearly that that's the kind of guy we need in that role. That's the kind of eclectic cast this movie needs. But I needed to see him do it. And so then he came in, and it was amazing, because it was so wonderful to see an actor walk in and do it perfectly, as I saw it in my head. Never happens.
Benicio was a suggestion of mine because they were having a very difficult time casting the role of Fenster. On the page, it wasn't particularly unique. You didn't even quite know what he did.
Fenster was originally written for a Harry Dean Stanton type, an older character. It was going to be sort of an older character and a younger character, Fenster McManus. But I felt there were enough old guys in the movie, and it was about time. And I thought the movie could be better served by a younger team, like a younger, less experienced team, but that still had their wits about them, that still were formidable criminals.
I said to Bryan, there's this actor I know. He's from another planet, but he's really, I think he's amazing.
I had an audition. Actually, it was an audition I didn't actually read. I met with Bryan Singer and Francine Maisler, who was the casting director. That was basically it.
I liked his ethnicity, his energy. I loved the small role he did in Swimming with Sharks, and his energy, and I thought it was so counter to Stephen Baldwin's. But then came the auditioning process, and I said, "Would you like to audition? Would you like to read?" And he said, I don't really do good in auditions. If I do the role, I bring you a character. You like the character? We do the character. You don't like the character? We do another character. And I'm like, well, we got 3 weeks till we're gonna shoot, so hope I like the character.
As I said, something else was going on in my life at the time, something personal, and movies were not my number one priority. They shouldn't be anybody's number one priority, but anyway, I said, get me out of it. And she said, really? You really think you're going to? I said, no, I don't want to do it. She said, how would you do? What would be the only thing? And I foolishly said, well, if they shot it in Los Angeles where I live and it took no longer than 5 weeks, I'll do it. And they came back and they said, we'll shoot it in Los Angeles and we'll shoot it in 5 weeks. And I said, okay, I'll do it. Little did I know, of course, that they were shooting it in Los Angeles and they only had 5 weeks to shoot it.
There was one moment where he probably wouldn't appreciate me mentioning it, but I understand where he was coming from at the time, so I'll mention it. He dropped out for 24 hours. And I freaked out, and it was my first time calling up an agent, because, you know, Andre Eastman and I had become friends, and I was like, no, you can't let this happen, no! And then he turned around and was sort of like, let's put it behind us. But he, you know, he had some cold feet, and of course you would, how could you not? I mean, I was 27 years old, and I looked like a production assistant, and I had done this very strange, esoteric movie that had the good fortune of winning this festival, but really never got distributed, and here we were doing this highly dense, convoluted piece of material with a shaky production. And, you know, and these are actors who've, you know, had some, you know, well, particularly Gabriel and Chazz, you know, these actors, you know, had done some real accomplished work for some serious filmmakers. You know, and it really was, I think, their faith in the words, first of all, in Chris's words. And that, you know, and that we were all together on it.
All actors, in my opinion, labor under the delusion that they're playing other people. All actors ultimately play themselves. And the better you can play yourself, the better the actor you are, in my opinion. There's a school of acting where you put on false noses and humps and put on weight and all that kind of stuff. That's one form of acting. It's a more spectacular, more flamboyant kind of performing. But the real challenge in acting is not to be other people, but to really be yourself. And the subtleties of acting are in looks, gestures, silences, a creating of enigma. That to me is the real power of complex acting, in my opinion.
The thing that's really cool about The Usual Suspects was everybody showed up wanting to just do their own thing. What made the movie so wild was there were these isolated opportunities of that idea, Benicio and Spacey, where these guys showed up and their interpretation of their own thing was something that was a little bit different than I think anybody else had anticipated.
I wanted to find out about cerebral palsy. I wanted to understand it, so I met with a number of doctors and experts in that field. And Bryan and I then had discussions about dramatically what we thought would be more interesting. You know, how should this affliction have affected Verbal Kint if you just take him as who he says he is, because that was the job, was to create a full character in Verbal Kint. And we decided ultimately that we thought it would be best that it affected the one side of his body, which is generally the way it is.
He ended up filing down his shoes, or the shoe on one side where the limp would have damaged the tread, and ultimately what we decided to do, because a person with cerebral palsy can't, you know, they're not holding this position. This position is held by their physiology and by the illness, and the condition. So what he did was, and what we decided to do was glue his fingers together.
I remember Bryan and I had dinner one night in a restaurant in Beverly Hills. It was just this small little cafe, but I'd been working a little bit and I'd been talking to some doctors, and so I wanted to show him what it might look like. So I got up from my table and started limping around this restaurant.
Ensemble work I really like because it reminds me of the theatre, because it's 5 people with a common goal and they're all playing off each other. And there's something very joyful and exhilarating when that works, when you feel that you're on the same level as other actors and they're feeding off you, and it's unique. It doesn't happen that often.
You know, Singer was brilliant because he created an atmosphere and an opportunity for everybody to go off, you know, and try anything.
I knew Stephen Baldwin 9 minutes before I went up to him and said, "This is painfully obvious to me that your older brothers stole your food at every meal and you're desperately trying to make up for it now. Okay, we believe you're a tough guy, so relax your crack and, you know, just talk to me, man." All right, you don't have to wave guns around like it's the OK fucking corral. All right. Oh, look, a knife. Yeah, let that go.
Kevin Pollak and I got along just fine on the picture, which is why I'm so shocked after the fact now that I've been getting these negative reports, that Pollak has been saying things about me behind my back. I guess as a result of the performances in the movie, which is, our characters kind of confront one another a little bit. I guess art is imitating life a little bit, and he must be confused in some way and think that perhaps the beating psychologically that my character gave his character in the movie is one that he feels now he must retaliate for in some way. Obviously, he should have learned his lesson the first time around, because he's just going to get more of the same.
And lose the leather pants, please, because, you're not a rock and roll star, so stop it.
I think for me, the biggest surprise of the cast was Kevin Pollak, who had never up to that point done the kind of dramatic work that he did in this film and did so successfully, and he just seamlessly was a part of a group of actors that really had spent most of their lives acting. And Kevin had spent most of his life being a comedian, and he brought certainly that certain sardonic quality and irony to his role, but he also, I think he just hit it out of the park.
I remember a kid from school who had an ability to sort of look through you, and that represented that sort of daunting sociopathic personality that your death wouldn't affect my life. But it still had to be a person in the story that you would take notice of or care about or be taken in by, or and so I just had a field day with the sort of subtle sarcasm of his character as opposed to being menacing. When I came to the project, the only two roles of the suspects that were left were the one I played and the one Benicio played. And Bryan, I remember saying, which of the two do you find yourself interested in, because Benicio hadn't been added yet. And I said, well, definitely Hockney, because Fenster, there's nothing there. And on the page, there really was nothing there.
Really, the purpose of my character was to die. He's the first fear of Kaiser Soze puts into the usual suspects, So I'm the first one to go. And looking at the dialogue and all that stuff, I realized that, it didn't really matter what I said. So I had a conversation with Bryan Singer, I remember, and I said, it really doesn't matter what I say. So I can go really far out with this and really make it incomprehensible.
At first I thought it was a joke, or maybe it wasn't. And I didn't want to offend him if it wasn't a joke, but I didn't want to look stupid if it was a joke. So I just went up to him and I said, is that the way you're going to do it for the whole movie? And he said, unless you want to do something else. And I said, no. Once I knew it was his choice, I embraced it.
Fenster is a German word, it means window. That's said as like, it was my window, I tell you that. I went out that window, it's like after that film, it was like, I was looked at like, I was an actor. I don't know, it's just like, it's a little character and it's got his life, a life of its own, in that film, and it worked out, it's, sometimes you try things like that, it doesn't, they don't work out as strong. I had my doubts all the way till the movie came out, whether it was going to work out or not, But how do I sum it up? Like I said, I don't know. I just feel like it was a character that was like, it was my own mumbles, I think Dustin Hoffman had done Dick Tracy had come out about 2 years before, I really liked that character, and it was the mumbles of the film, it was like, this is funny.
He, by making that choice, made his character much more electrifying and also more sympathetic. So when he dies, it's kind of heartbreaking, even in this more plot-driven movie. The way it was financed in the end, and I And I was also so young that at the time that I treated it like I was making one of my 8mm films down the block with my friends. I just said, this is what I want. There's no other. There is nothing else. It's just do it. And we have to get it done. You have to sign on. We have to do that. And perhaps if it had come later, I would have been less secure and I wouldn't have pushed as hard for the things that I got. But that's what happens when you're young and stupid.
The difference between a director and a great director is that what happens on the page is transferred to the screen in a magical way that's almost unrecognizable from the page, and that's what Singer did. Everything that he talked about in the Garden of the Sunset Marquee that morning was on the screen, and more. And he, as a director, not that terribly interested in the intricacies of directing actors, but he didn't need to, because he had done his work already by casting the movie properly.
The appeal of working with an ensemble cast is one, because it gives you some place to go with the camera. It gives you other characters to look at and other stories to follow. I also like it from a production standpoint because it keeps people's egos at bay. No one feels the whole film is resting on their shoulders. If somebody gets down or a bit insecure about what they're doing, somebody else is there to pick up spirits besides just myself. So it makes it less of a full-time job for me. So I very much enjoy the ensemble cast. I enjoyed, and when I went to make X-Men, I felt like I was almost back on the set of The Usual Suspects. And when you're having a good ensemble experience, it creates a camaraderie. So you feel that the actors have found a kind of family amongst each other, and it leaves me to sort of, do my job in a way outside of that.
He understands, I think, cinema, and he thinks, I think, in cuts. He's not a director who shoots the heck out of a scene because he has absolutely no idea what he wants to do with it and then figures it out in editing later. He's very specific. I mean, I'll give you an example of a fast shooting. We shot the entire interrogation between Chazz and I in 5 days in that one room. And it was a lot.
Kevin and I started the movie. It was almost like we filmed the play.
Got him all
Then
wrong.
we stopped, and then they started the movie.
Do I?
So I really didn't see anything. I didn't get a chance to see no dailies or nothing.
One of the reasons that Bryan both requested and I happily agreed that I wouldn't come and see dailies was that he didn't want me second guessing whether what was going on underneath that I was telegraphing in any way. And because I trusted Bryan completely as a filmmaker and had such confidence in the screenplay, I was able to do that actually for the first time in my work in film.
I went down to visit the interrogation scenes. They shot that before the rest of the movie. And Spacey was off camera walking around with I had a friend with me, and he said, boy, this guy's a good actor, because I've seen him in movies before, and he didn't have that limp. He thought Spacey had the limp in real life. That person's no longer my friend. I don't hang out with idiots.
I know that when I worked with Bryan Singer and I got to know him, his conviction and his dedication was the same as mine. He didn't care. When we were shooting the scene in the parking lot when I shoot the two guys, that was like an 18-hour day.
That scene is a longer scene. It had to be cut there because we went into the underground car park at 8 o'clock at night, and at 6:45 the next morning we still hadn't got the scene.
With the producer saying, you can't do this. The Bond company's on the way. They're gonna shut us down.
And the sound man was standing with his boom, and he said, I am so sick of working with amateurs who can't get what they want. This movie will never cut together. And I wish I was at home now, because I've been working all night and this is a pain in the ass having to do this.
And Bryan, I hear that, and then Bryan comes over to direct me, and I'm like, he's talking to me about the scene, and I'm going, did you hear the Bond company's coming? And he's like, so what? And I was like, well, are they gonna shut us down? He's like, no. Nothing's gonna stop us from doing what we have to do. Now that as an artist, that's why I make movies. I won't compromise anything when it comes to my performance. And Bryan was not willing to compromise anything when it came to The Usual Suspects.
Because I don't always know what I want. Very often I don't know what I want. I know what I don't want. But and if that ever causes an actor to just lose trust and then lash out, that's something I fear. But there's no actor that I know of that I've ever worked with where that experience has happened. And we've been in some tough spots. We've been in spots where we're writing on the set together, you know, in a caucus, you know, as of actors and directors playing screenwriters, you know, and we realize that's the process. Filmmaking is a process of discovery and, most importantly, collaboration. And part of embracing collaboration is trust.
While doing the movie, there was definitely a feeling that we were working for coffee and donuts, as was everyone else. And it was sort of guerrilla filmmaking in that regard. And yet, I don't remember too many times when we felt completely pressed for time. In fact, it was only in the day that we shot the police lineup, the infamous police lineup, where we ran into scheduling problems. And the only reason we did was because we, the suspects, couldn't get through the scene without laughing.
Behind the camera, you have Chris McQuarrie, the writer, asking the questions, to which all of the actors improvise answers. And if you watch Baldwin, for example, he sets the tone. When he did that, we all cracked up because it was just so funny.
All I remember is that someone farted, and no one knew. No one knew it was the guilty party, you know.
The now Academy Award-winning Benicio del Toro farted like 12 takes in a row. And we could not stop laughing, even when he stopped finally. It wasn't the words, really, that were emoting from this now Academy Award-winning actor, as much as it was the gas that was escaping from his ass.
That just literally opened the floodgates, and then Stephen went and I went, and we all laughed, and then we tried to control ourselves, and then we cut, and then we started again, and it happened again, and it happened all morning.
Shut up, you fuck. God, shut up.
I think Gabriel is the one who gave you this feeling that he was the most serious of them all. When he cracked up, I knew we were like in trouble. When Gabriel would crack up, it was just like, this is going south. We're not going to get one take here, because if he's cracking up, I'm not going to be able to stop it.
I have such happy memories of The Usual Suspects, both for the work that we did, and also for the time in between the work, because all I remember is laughing all the way through the movie.
I can't tell you how many times I heard Gabriel say, after we would screw up a particular shot, "You fucking guys, you know."
Shut up.
Can we just do this now? Fuck. For Christ's sake. And then he'd laugh uncontrollably.
Shut up, you.
So at lunch, Bryan was very frustrated, and he was, I would hearken to say he was just even a little angry. And so there was a meeting that was called of all of us, and Bryan really chewed us out. He chewed us out quite seriously, that we were really up his movie, and that we better pull our act together.
And that was like telling, children not to laugh in church. And so we went back to work after lunch and proceeded to laugh even harder, and if not more uncontrollably. And felt bad about it, but couldn't help ourselves.
I don't think he ever got a take where we weren't in hysterics. And then Bryan did a brilliant thing, which is that he took it and he used it, and he took our hilarity and our little unrelenting unprofessionalism that day, and he incorporated it into the film.
I said, but you can't use that in the movie. I said, because we weren't performing. And he said to me, and I'll never forget Bryan saying this to me, he said, yeah, but in that moment of humor between these guys, we see a certain humanity. We see that they're just people, and they're friends. There's a bonding that actually is transpiring between them in that moment.
And to Bryan's credit, when he got into editing, he realized, well, by them laughing, and if I allow myself to stray from what was originally intended, it shows an instant camaraderie, and it's another way to say you to the cops.
And it's also credit to John Ottman as an editor to be able to make that work, because we never really got a take. And somehow shooting it, I knew it'd be all okay. But really, I have to credit John for really taking a lot of mistakes and manufacturing them in that way.
When they started laughing, I thought, this is hilarious, and it didn't feel like bloopers to me. It felt like the real thing. So, and I thought, what a great opportunity to get the audience to warm up to these characters now. When you see a character laugh, even if they're a horrible person as a character and a criminal, it makes them lovable in some way, and you're going to be along for the ride with these people. And so I felt it was completely necessary to use all this bloopers and somehow tie them together seamlessly where it felt like it wasn't constructed.
To see what happened from that page to what's on the screen is to understand when ensemble works as it should. It's magical.
I remember one of the first times we were all shooting together. We were in the pool hall scene when Pete Postlethwaite's character shows up. You know, it's a long, like 4 to 6 page dialogue scene, or even more maybe. And but I'll never forget, like, everybody's in the room and Bryan says action, and it's a 2-shot on myself and Benicio. And
Bryan was aware that I was gonna come out of left field, but I don't think any of the other actors were aware of that. Sometimes when you do that kind of stuff, it can look pretty pompous, you know.
I'll never forget kind of like not knowing whether or not he was fucking kidding around or he was having some kind of epileptic fit. And I remember, you know, clear as day, leaning, like him saying it, but he wasn't looking at me. He just like said his line. And I looked over at Bryan. During the shot, I looked over at Bryan. And Bryan was behind the monitor and I couldn't see him. And I'm looking, and when Bryan didn't hear me cue the next line, Bryan kind of leaned out from behind the monitor, and I literally looked right at Bryan and I went, like, what the hell am I supposed to do right now? And Bryan, cool as a cucumber, just went, it's okay. Like, don't worry about it. This is between me and Benicio. Oh, fine, I'm just a schmuck sitting here that's like supposed to understand all this.
Listen, Benicio, you're mumbling. Is it me? Am I crazy? I can't hear what this guy's saying. Why don't you just speak, seriously?
And at one point, I remember all the actors came to me, led by Gabriel Byrne, and they said, you know, we all respect Benicio as an actor, and we don't mean to mess with his process, but we can't understand what he's saying. I mean, is this what you're going for? and I was like, you know, this was before we did the prison scene, the scene in the lockup. And I said, well, you know, if you don't understand what he's saying, maybe it's time we let the audience know that they don't need to understand what he's saying. So I think one of you should ask him. One thing about Benicio, when he gets into a character, he is enraptured in that character. And this character had, you know, this affectation of speech that very often it would overcome Benicio and he'd get sort of stuck. Getting the words out, and it was really something to see.
So the way I hear it saying is the way God damn it. This is bad. A pitiless psycho.
As an actor trying to figure out which part makes the most sense, that one didn't make any sense. Cut to, Benicio steals every scene he's in. So, to me, it always said even more about him as a great actor, that he was able to take literally nothing and turn it into a scene stealer every time.
Maybe it was the first time I had a director that really kind of like fed that trust in you, and he really trusted what I was going to do, and you know, allowed the risk taking from my part to grow, you know. So, you know, I had a great time. I mean, what can I say, you know?
Making a movie is, I guess, like this. You don't know what it's going to turn out like until you cut it together, and what you have in your head is usually not what's on the screen. It's one of the things that's intriguing about making movies. It's an addictive thing because you don't quite know how it's going to turn out.
First time I saw the cut of Usual Suspects, early cut, I was just blown away. I mean, Bryan's visual storytelling, you only knew so much as he described it to you. You know, that's the mark of a great filmmaker, is that can't be crystal clear. If it's crystal clear when they describe it, then you won't be surprised later. Then there's no jump to. And also the editing and the music and so many of the things, obviously, you're not privy to when you're doing the scenes. And the pacing and also the visual power from such a small budget.
Tom Siegel's cinematography, which made that movie, which was shot for $4 million. We shot the movie, I think, in 30 days and blew up a boat on the last day. He made that movie look like it cost $50 million because his eye through that lens also was responsible for things being slightly off that you don't register in a conscious way, but unconsciously.
He's wonderful to work with, and he trusts me a lot too, and he always is out to do what can be done and never ever say that can't be done. You know?
I was just stunned by its style and its clarity, and its mystery, and its humor. I was just stunned by it. I didn't think it was going to really do anything. I thought maybe critics might like it, and the fact that it sort of went on and found an audience and sort of a great following since was a great dividend.